Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with a look at your Alaska weather for this 26th of December. Thanks for joining us this afternoon and this evening. As always, you're encouraged to stay up to date on your local weather information. 1-800-472-0391 is the number to call there. Weather.gov/Alaska is how you find us online. Once you click on that website, you'll be taken to your nearest weather forecast office in Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage, or the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit is easily accessible from that webpage. Or you can find the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center and track conditions there related to precipitation that's already on the ground. If you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to email me anytime. david.snider@noaa.gov is how you find me in the emails. All right, here's a look at what's going on across Alaska tonight. As you look up north around the Klondike Highway, a wind chill advisory is posted. That'll continue until about 9 o'clock tonight because the winds are going to stay up. Because the winds are staying up and it's cold, it feels a lot colder than it actually is. And it may be that feels like temperature gets down to about 30 to 35 below. And so in about 30 minutes or so, that's enough to give you a decent amount of frostbite. So do be extra careful. If you're traveling the Klondike Highway, we'd encourage you to just make sure you've got enough layers and packed in the trunk, even if you're not wearing them there. It's always a good idea to be prepared for the cold in case something unexpected happens and you break down. You got to stay warm for just a little while, especially if you got to be out there on the side of the road. So wind chill advisory for the Klondike Highway area and White Pass until about 9 o'clock tonight, thanks to the winds moving through that region. A look up north also has to do with wind. This is a winter weather advisory for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, including areas generally east of Kaktovik. Because the wind is blowing up to about 30 to 35 miles per hour, we're expecting that the visibility may drop down because of snow blowing around there. So at least until about 9 o'clock tonight, winds expected to affect the visibility because of the snow. And if you're traveling, you're moving around east of Kaktovik, expect that you're going to have some of that poor visibility, at least at times. And make sure you've got a plan for how to get back or let somebody know that you're coming or going. So if something bad happens again, they know where to look for you. So that's a look at around Alaska. Everything else is pretty quiet out there. Kind of hate to say that. Don't want to encourage the bad things. But as we look back through the last 12 to 24 hours of satellite pictures, you can see low pressure is sitting way south in the Gulf right now. It's got a front that's trying to creep its way up toward Haida Gwaii. You can kind of see it creeping over here. Pretty dry conditions across southeast. High pressure is anchored across the central and northern Yukon, across the northern interior, across the northwestern interior. So we got a couple things going on here. First, we got an immense amount of cold and dense air up across the interior and across Canada. That is what's pouring its way in through the White Pass area and over the Klondike Highway. And that rush of wind not only is keeping things dry and breezy across northern parts of southeast, but it's making you feel pretty cold there too with that wind chill. But the other thing it's doing is limiting the amount of moisture making its way into the interior. We do have kind of a quasi or almost front here across the north. This trough of low pressure is working its way eastward, and it will probably become a cold front in the next couple days. But remember, there's a really big bubble of high pressure over here, a big ball of very stable air that doesn't want to be disturbed or doesn't really want to move. We've got another big bubble of that over here. And in between is this little boundary here. So this is going to try and move eastward, but what you're going to see on the map is it moves eastward and then it kind of backs up a little bit, which is a little different. Usually stuff moves from west to east and then moves on its merry way. Out across the west, another big surge of cloud cover across the central and western Aleutians. That's due to the next Bering Sea low pressure system. This is moving up out of the North Pacific. And once again, a steady stream of southerly and very warm and wet winds working their way into the Bering Sea. And it's going to take some time for this to move north and east. Why? Well, the same reason that a little weather system is going to move east and then kind of back up a little bit. There's a big bubble of high pressure here and a big bubble of high pressure there. And really, that's kind of taking over this entire area of interior Alaska and the west coast and doesn't want to allow things to move into it. So this is stable, and that is not, and this does not get to move into a very stable area without an awful lot of work, a lot of things changing. So The weather situation is relatively solid right now compared to how things were changing an awful lot in the last couple of weeks. Again, with low pressure working in, though, that is the fly in the ointment, is how strong will that get, and will it be able to affect some change here from what we have right now? So here we go. High pressure across the interior is pushing that 1,050 millibar level. You know that's an important level there if you're an aviator, because that's when the altimeters start to get a little wonky. You got to be careful with that. So we are watching that, and if that gets to that level on Alaska weather anyway, we're going to change this number to red, so that you know that, hey, we're watching this, you should watch this too. This is an area of concern. Right now, we don't have that. We probably have a few spots in between that could be reaching that, especially at night when the air is even colder. But right now, sub 1,050 millibar levels there. We've got some pockets of snow up around the Alaska Range, out across southwest, and some areas of fog under that high pressure system as well. A front draped across the north and eastern Gulf Coast, some pockets of fog around Ketchikan, and this wave of warm air that's traveling from east to west across the western Gulf, a little bit of rain across the Alaska Peninsula with that, a front out across the central chain. Notice how high these low pressure readings are, though. It's all relative, right? Big high pressure systems at 1,040 plus, and low pressure systems that are about 20 millibars lower, but only 1,024 millibars. So I'm sorry, that's a little weather humor there. It's all relative stuff. A look at tonight's forecast shows high pressure across northern parts of British Columbia and western Yukon, and across the north coast, and across eastern sections of Asia, 1,048, not 1,050 yet. And you can see several waves of low pressure trying to interrupt that and traveling from west to east. Here's our low across the Gulf, not moving very much. Some light snow possible across Haida Gwaii. A trough in the northern Gulf, some pockets of fog for the Copper River Valley, as well as areas in the Kenai Peninsula. And out west, a sign of some change, some warmer air working northward. That pretty much kind of vanishes on Wednesday. But now our high has grown in strength up to 1,050 millibars, so we mark that in red for you. And our low that was traveling eastward is now 1,032 millibars, so it's actually weakening as that number comes up. And here's our front, starting to make some progress northward into the Gulf as high pressure across western Yukon is moving eastward into more parts of central Canada. We're still under a very broad area of high pressure. Snow across the North Slope is possible. Snow showers around St. Lawrence Island, and some rain and snow mixed for the central and eastern Aleutians there. And really, that is about it, save for a couple snow showers around the Kenai Peninsula and outside of Prince William Sound, and maybe on the Pacific coast side or the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Watch this low here. It's actually going to back up just a little bit because this high moved a little bit and said, I don't think so. You're not coming into Canada today. Now, 1,029 millibars, the low sits across Kaktovik and should keep snow pouring into the coastal plain area, which includes Barrow and Wainwright all the way down to Atkasuk, and then eastward toward Kaktovik, because this is grabbing cold air and probably some wetter air and pushing that kind of up the hill gradually into the Brooks Range. We have snow showers possible for the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and all the way down to St. Matthew. And our low out here across the North Pacific is deepening a little bit, 973 now. And you can see rain and snow starting to form up a little bit more across parts of the central and eastern chain, all the way out towards Shemya as well. And the winds are going to come up. You'll start to see that pressure gradient tightening up because it can't move. So what does it have to do? It has to get bigger and a little bit stronger in order to make any progress against the high. And since it's not doing that, the pressure gradient and the winds will start to come up even more. So low in the Gulf, and no big progress for southeast, but it does look like the winds are going to start picking up a little bit more, especially for the areas around the Lynn Canal. So keep your eye on that as we head into Wednesday and Thursday. Let's take a look at temperatures quickly. Temps anywhere from 5 to about 20 below across the central and eastern parts of the interior, 26 below for Northway. It's going to be cold. Single digits and teens for many in southeast, a few coastal areas in the 20s. Teens and 20s for south central, the North Slope, single digits. Kotzebue Sound looking at temps in the teens overnight, 11 in Nome. Bethel looking at temps in the lower teens, 27 in St. Paul, 20s and 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the Western Chain. Highs tomorrow, really not a whole lot warmer. You're looking at temps anywhere from 5 above to about 12 to 20 below. Low to mid-teens for the North Slope, 23 in Nome, Shishmaref 25, southeast 20s and 30s for highs. South Central, teens and 20s, 30s for Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula 33 in St. Paul. So colder weather is going to take a hold over a large part of Alaska as we get into your midweek.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. IFR conditions will start for a large part of the YK Delta, especially the Yukon side of the Delta into Norton Sound and parts of the middle Yukon Valley in the upper Kuskokwim. Look for IFR conditions to start your Wednesday in Kotzebue Sound, as well as parts of the coastal plain out toward Kaktovik, up toward areas around Barrow, Wainwright, and Point Hope and Point Lay. Southeast still sitting pretty, though. The winds will be an issue at times across the Lynn Canal and out of the Copper River Delta, but most areas will see VFR across the northern and eastern Gulf. As we get into the afternoon, MVFR a little more prevalent than IFR across the Bering Sea, the YK Delta, looking at VFR conditions inland, but as you get out toward the coast, MVFR conditions are expected. The upper Kuskokwim, as well as areas in Norton Sound, will see limited ceilings and visibility there. IFR conditions there poking into the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, and the North Slope looking at widespread IFR as you go through your Wednesday afternoon. That continues into Thursday morning. Southeast still sitting pretty. Most of the interior really looking pretty good, but the west and the west coast especially looking at MVFR to IFR conditions for the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula out toward Wales. Looks like parts of Norton Sound looking at mainly MVFR with the YK Delta south of Amonik, expecting VFR conditions out toward Nunivak Island, St. Paul and St. George. MVFR conditions there through the afternoon. That should continue. IFR continues for the North Slope as we get into your Thursday afternoon, with Southeast and a large part of South Central still doing pretty well, but MVFR sneaking into parts of Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, and Bristol Bay. Let's take a look at your past conditions in general now. For Wednesday, you're expected to see MVFR transitioning to IFR conditions for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass on your Wednesday afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to see improvements toward VFR as the day goes on. Same goes for Rainy Pass, expecting to push over toward VFR conditions as we get into your midweek. Windy Pass expected to see improving ceiling and visibility as we go. Same goes for Isabel Pass, but a start at MVFR is expected there, and for Mentasta Pass on Wednesday. Tenita Pass looks pretty good to start there and finish. VFR conditions there for Portage Pass, but MVFR won't be that far away, generally just south of the region there as you get into your Wednesday afternoon. And Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to hold at VFR. Cold air is back for Alaska. That's great news. And the surface freezing line hovering right around the Gulf Coast. 2,000-foot freezing levels are pushed a little bit further south of the Haida Gwaii region out over the Gulf, and nowhere to be seen near the Bering right now. Icing potential is limited to about 3,000 to 4,000 feet and above, generally isolated moderate to be expected, and hit and miss across the interior, as well as parts of west and southwestern Alaska, and poking its way out over the Talkeetnas and Tenita Pass. For Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, past Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and Falls Pass to just about Unalaska and Nikolsky, you're looking at some isolated moderate risks there, generally above 4,000 feet. And my, what a messy jet stream we're back under the influence of. Broad area of low pressure has shifted its way into the interior of Canada now. This is the big bubble of Arctic cold that most of Alaska has been missing out on. This has shifted out and away and stayed to the east of the Rockies now. High pressure is developing across the region, and around the Gulf of Anadyr you can see one bubble. It's trying to really get established at the surface level. We're watching this to see if it pokes up to about that 1,050 millibar level, a critical point for aviators, of course. That southerly flow wraps around and becomes northerly as it heads into northwestern Alaska, so there is colder air on that wind. But we're still dealing with a southerly flow thanks to high pressure sitting across the northern Gulf, and those winds out over the interior are running around 60 to 65 knots. The main core of the storm path is out across the North Pacific. That is being bent out and away from Alaska right now back into Asia. At 9,000 feet you can see a trough of low pressure over the Gulf. Southerlies coming up into southeast. Winds are very light there right now. More of an east and southeasterly flow at 10 knots. You can see low pressure across the interior. That's also fairly weak. The really big guiding force, I think, is this high pressure system here across eastern Asia. That's that northeasterly flow coming into the west coast now. Totally different than it was just a week ago. So big news there. 10 to 15 knots or so coming in from the north. You can see it's oriented a little bit more of a northeasterly flow across the Arctic coast and the western parts of the interior. A little bit of stronger wind here out of the north and east in the middle Yukon Valley, 5, 10, even 20 knots or so. Here's our low pressure trough across the Gulf, still guiding in weak southerlies into southeast. A stronger flow across the Alaska Peninsula, gets 20 to 25 there. And strong winds ahead of the next weather maker there for the Aleutians, 50 to 65 knots already around Shemya. And that's where we find really our own big risk of turbulence, probably considerable moderate there west from Kiska to Attu, maybe from Adak there, generally below 4,000 feet. We're going to watch for some bumps just outside of the Copper River Delta. Some of that could reach as high as considerable moderate in that very small area below 4,000 feet. Stay tuned. We'll have a look at your marine weather coming up here in just a few minutes.
all set. Oil's okay, gas is sumped, hydraulic reservoir is full. Now that your pre-flight's complete, it's a good idea to go and get a weather briefing from your local flight service station. In this country, it's real important. How's it going, Dick?
Pretty good, Don. How you doing this morning?
Yeah, good. Heading up to the hill today, southeast Fort. What do you got for weather up in that area?
Well, basically, we've got a pretty well entrenched high-pressure system over Siberia. It's keeping the lows pretty well south of us along the chain in the peninsula. We'll probably be in the fringe area up here of some middle and high clouds, 12,000 scattered with high thin cirrus. Lower clouds and possibly some light precipitation in the southern Susitna Valley, but I don't expect any up in the northern valley or along the range today.
Okay. All right, real good. Thanks, Dick. And we'll follow flight plan. Because of some of the extreme weather conditions up on the glacier and the environment there, we want to be sure and bring some special survival gear along. For sure, a couple of sleeping bags, an extra parka, some snowshoes, some good survival gear. Your life could depend on it. Okay, a good top is the word cigar. And that includes C for controls, controls move free and easy. I for instruments. I've got that's a directional gyro set, altimeter set. Gauges are in the green. Top flap open. G, gas. A, attitude. R, rudder set. Rudder set. Firing, three souls on board aircraft. I have 4 hours of fuel on board, 2 hours in the southeast for navigation. Scramble gear on board, 2 hours in the last one, all that fuel. As we start gaining altitude, we'll start losing our manifold pressure because of the density of the air. So as we climb, I'll slowly be taking over the throttle on that. Okay, real good. We still don't have visual. Well, after one shot pass at about a 45-degree angle, and we're watching the wind, come over the time that.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge on this 26th of December, and you can still see there is some open water across the Chukchi Sea north and through the Bering Strait. However, ice is beginning to fill back in. Remember, there's a very large area of cold, high pressure here starting to push in some northerly winds, and it looks like the next several days anyway, we'll get back into that northerly flow, which first is colder, and with growing high pressure, the wind should start to calm down at least a little bit. Let's see if that's true with your marine forecast here. We're going to start in the southeast. North and northeasterly winds will be blustery through the Lynn Canal and into Stevens Passage. Gusts in Stevens Passage could reach up to 40 knots or so with 5-foot seas, 6-foot seas in the Lynn Canal, the northerly flow, and again a wind chill advisory in the White Pass region as well. Southeasterlies across the outer coast, 15 to 20 knots with seas ranging from about 6 to 8 feet on Thursday. The offshore flow continues 15 to 25 knots with seas ranging from 7 to 11 feet outside of the Clarence Strait and Dixon entrance there. Northeasterlies coming in off the mountains, anywhere from 20 to 30 knots for the inside passage, 4 to 6 foot seas there, 7-foot seas in the Lynn Canal, and gusts to 50 knots as we get into your Thursday in southeast. For south central, light winds inside of Prince William Sound, 10 knots and 2-foot seas. Look for 10 to 20 knot winds coming down Cook Inlet. The seas pick up just a little bit more south of Cowden Island. 5-foot seas expected there to the West Barrens. 15 to 20 knots across the north and western Gulf with 8 to 9-foot seas on Wednesday. A little bit more of an easterly push as we get into Thursday. Winds remain light in all areas, 10 to 15 knots. And you're looking at about 3 to 5-foot seas across Cook Inlet, 2-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound, and 9-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. For Bristol Bay, northerlies inside the region, 4-foot seas expected there. Northeasterlies down the Bering Sea coast, 25 knots, looking for 25 knots on either side of Kodiak Island and down the Pacific coastline, looking for 11 to 16-foot seas on Wednesday. And as we get into Thursday, seas and winds diminish in all areas. 3 to 4-foot sea down the Bering Sea coast, 15 to 20 knot winds from the north and east. And northeasterlies down the Pacific coast, and again on either side of Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 there. 5-foot seas to about 9-foot seas in the entire region. For the Aleutians, look for stronger winds west of Kiska to Attu, 35 to 45 knots out there with 23-foot seas near Shemya and Kiska. Otherwise, you're looking at 25 to 30 knot winds, generally from the east and northeast, 10 to 15-foot seas across the Pacific, and 8 to 9-foot seas across most of the Bering Sea coast. As we get into Thursday and low pressure is getting a little bit closer to the chain, you start to see those winds coming up. So we get into our storm force winds once again for the central and western chain. Anywhere from 45 to 50 knot winds are expected, and nearly 30-foot seas out here from Kiska to Shemya. And then 18 to 25-foot seas across the chain with a broad easterly flow, and winds pick up but don't quite reach into that really strong category again, anywhere from 6 to 12-foot seas from Nikolsky to Unalaska on a 20 to 25 knot wind from the east. For the west coast, north and easterly winds are still blowing out there, especially around Nunivak Island toward the Pribilofs, 15 to 25 in most areas, 3 to 5-foot seas there in the open water. Watch for periods of heavy freezing spray as you get north of St. Lawrence Island. Winds will be light across Norton Sound over the ice at 10 knots as we get into Thursday. Northerly winds still coming into Savunga and St. Lawrence Island. They're right through the Bering Strait. So again, watch for heavy freezing spray, especially north of St. Lawrence Island. Northeasterlies around Nunivak Island and into St. Paul and St. George, you're looking at 20 to 25 knot winds and 5 to 8-foot seas there in that region. For the North Slope now, light winds coming in due north, 5 to 10 knots, 15 knots from the north and east near Kaktovik, all over the ice. Northerlies coming off the open water, And through the Bering Strait there, outside of Kotzebue Sound, 20 knots and 4 to 5 foot seas. Again, watch for heavy freezing spray, and that could be even worse as we get into Thursday. North and easterly winds there, and again, we'll be watching for effects there into Savunga. Northerlies across the Beaufort Sea and over the ice, 10 to 15 knots, but that north and easterly wind at 20 to 25 is going to be cold and potentially wet and therefore freezing. So be careful out there on Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, high pressure is taking charge of Alaska. It's cooling it down everywhere. A fairly stout ridge of high pressure aloft is trying to change things up at the surface. That's pushing wind through places like White Pass, so wind chill advisory is in effect until 9 o'clock there for values that could feel as cold as 30 to 35 below zero. Up north, it's a winter weather advisory for winds coming across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, mainly east of Kaktovik, and visibility could suffer as a result of that blowing snow. That should wrap up as well during the evening hours. Out west, you can see the next weather makers trying to build in. Across the western chain, a front is working northward across the open waters of the Gulf. As that moves in a little bit, the winds should stay up across southeast, but conditions should remain clear and dry for you. Watch for some areas of light snow around south central and near Kodiak Island, but most areas in south central and southwest stay dry. A weak front moving through the northern sections of Alaska, and an increasing area of low pressure across the northern parts of the Pacific. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.